Okay, all done.
You're muted at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah? Okay, brilliant. I was saying I bring you greetings from Ghana. You can see that I'm not in jumpers and shirts this evening. It feels a bit warmer down here compared to what it is in England at the moment. But thank God for technology. We can still fellowship and be able to share regardless of where we are on the globe at the moment. I just want to start, Pastor, by thanking you for that devotion. I think you made a point there that is very crucial to our co-partnership, with Christ. We have been called to be his co-workers, co-partners in the soul work of soul saving. And whilst we know that ultimately this is about salvation in the eternal sense, we also have a responsibility towards one another, even to a point that sometimes we can also help to avert or prevent any lives that could be lost whilst we're here. So very, very crucial. All leaders, and we all have a role to play as we work for the Master. So this evening, we'll just continue from where we left off last time. We started looking at, 3 weeks ago, we started looking at the subject of depression, and then we looked at what we can do to help each other if we live with someone who is struggling with depression. But then we also touched on, I think, the introductory part of suicide prevention. This doesn't have a lot of slides, so only a couple that we would be looking at, and then hopefully we would start by also looking at some anxiety stuff as well. Again, because of time, it may just be introductory, but I do bear in mind what Pastor said last time. This is not about rushing. This is trying to get the best that we can get from the time we have. And if that means we actually have to shelve the anxiety and do it as a series altogether, then I believe, Pastor, we probably can arrange to do something on that. So going back to the subject of suicide, I believe you can see my screen now. We will take off just a very quick recap from, right, sorry, I just need to squeeze through, always fast. We'll just take it from, just a very quick highlight of, some of the figures that we looked at last time in terms of how many people possibly maybe taking their lives every 30 seconds. And out of that, how many people would have attempted, which simply highlights perhaps the scale, of the problem that we are considering here, that maybe it is much bigger than we have anticipated. By no means are we looking at this as something to create in itself a sense of depression for others, or something to create gloominess and lack of hope. But this is an awareness exercise, so we can look out for some of the things that we might be able to do to help prevent suicide from happening. Before we look at those two slides today about risk factors and what happens, any thoughts from anyone in terms of looking at those figures, whether you've had any reflection on that in the course of the week? Any thoughts at all before we look at those two other slides? Yes, David.
Yeah, thank you, Emmanuel. I'm appalled and amazed at how many people are committing suicide. I had no idea it was that. I know it's global, it's still really high.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much. It's very important. And I guess this is more so even the reason why it's important that we having these conversations. Sometimes we hear of some of these things almost like from afar, and we tend to think, oh, this is something that is happening out there. It's nothing to do with me, until you realize that it can be very, very close to home. I don't know if I did share with you some, a session or a retreat I attended, and a young man saying that, oh, why are we talking about these problems, something we never really had as an issue before, until a brother from within the group stood up and said that he lost his brother through suicide. And then it really kind of shifted the whole conversation and the complexion of how people were perceiving the problem. So by all means, it's quite alarming when you look at these figures, both young and old, in terms of how many people are at a point in life where they have lost all hope. And I guess the key thing is, and maybe for us as Christians, perhaps it highlights the importance of our role. We have a message of hope that we can bring to people. And in my line of work, what is so prominent when you work with people who have no Christian background, faith, anything, you realize that when they come to a point of crisis, to them, this is all they've got. And so losing hope becomes something that happens very quickly for them. But we have hope. And the question is, how are we sharing that hope with others? So very, very important. And thank you for raising that. Anybody else with any thoughts, any reflections?
Yeah, I think sometimes Christians, we are in denial and probably not recognizing the fact that these ideas comes into mind every day of our lives. I personally, it crosses my mind. It's just that I don't dwell on it. Sometimes when you face challenges in life, and it's not unique to certain people. It's momentary decision. Many a times, people who commit suicide do not process it for a long time, because if you do process it, you will rationalize it and you will not go through with it. And so it's momentary. If we look at Elijah was a great man of God, successfully defended position of God in Israel, and defeated the worshippers of Baal. And what did he do? He sat down and said, God, I am the only one. Now take my life. I don't want to carry on anymore. And we see several examples in the Bible. And this happens to many of us. Sometimes it just flashes and goes. But because we don't dwell on it, and sometimes culture makes it abomination or abominable to talk about it, to say, or Christianity, even our faith makes it abominable, that is something we cannot even talk about, even though it crosses your mind. And so it is important that we have these conversations and normalize it, that these things can happen, but there is always help. And if that is crossing your mind, it is important that you talk to someone about it and make it, rationalize it, make understand that there is someone, or there is help for these things.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Pastor. Thank you. You've kind of highlighted quite a few important things there. One being the issue of denial. Very true. for a long time as a church, as I said, this was not something we'll talk about, because we have God, we have faith. We should not, almost like, because we have God and faith, that we are above the trials, the tribulations, the realities of this life, even though Jesus himself said, in this world, you would have tribulations. But then what he did say in addition is that, be of good cheer, because I have overcome the world. But the reality of life is something we all experience at one point or another. And you're absolutely right. People get to that zone, and it's not a case that sometimes they sit and think and dwell, even though that sometimes happens with some people. But it's that sense of, I just can't go on anymore. It's that level of overwhelmingness that a person experiences, that level of helplessness and hopelessness, and leading us to then believe that actually life isn't worth continuing. Thank you very much for that. Anybody else with any thoughts, any reflections so far? Just looking at the figures, and then we go into looking at the risk factors and possibly signs and symptoms we need to look out for as well. Okay, if there isn't anybody else, I would move on to the slides we're looking at today, and then once we've done with that, if there is time, we will look at least some introductory part of anxiety as well. Okay, so risk factors. When somebody, what may be some of the factors that a person might be experiencing or might be going through that might make them more susceptible to possibly contemplate or even go as far as carrying out suicide? As we looked at in depression and also in other mental health presentations, such as depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, excessive substance abuse, people who might go through this usually may carry a level of suicidal ideation. It's a risk factor when somebody struggles with any of these presentations. So when we are with people, when we know people who may be struggling with any of these sort of presentations, it's worth keeping an eye out of them. We're not saying anybody that struggles with depression is going to commit suicide, or anybody that has bipolar is going to commit suicide. But these are risk factors, and when people have them, this is where the be my brother's keeper is important. Let's look out for some of the potentials that this could be something that could lead to a person contemplating or even acting on taking their own lives. And then there are psychosocial stressors, sometimes such as people that may have experienced sexual or child abuse, or have an accident or torture. One of the things that at least I've had the privilege of working with a few people is the area of those that have struggled with abuse, and in particular, those that may have struggled with sexual abuse. This as a form of trauma. Trauma carries such a significant repercussions on an individual in terms of what it creates for them, from the time they experience those abuses and from that point on, and what their lives could become. And sometimes this is so significant that people may feel like there is no point in trying to carry on with life anymore. If I may just give a very, very quick example of a lady I worked with who had been abused by her own biological father for many years, and also then went on to be abused by her husband when she got married. And what had happened was that for a number of years, when this man showed up and she felt that was a chance to to escape and leave home, she couldn't wait to get married and leave. But then after a number of years, after she felt she'd learned to trust this man that she was now with, decided she would disclose, the abuse that the father had put her through over the years. And how she described the day that she decided to tell, the husband what the father had done to her is almost like the husband felt that was his license also to start abusing her. This woman had had such a terrible, terrible experience for years. We're talking about complexity of the traumas that she'd been through. When I met with her, she was already with a gentleman he was truly a gentleman, extremely caring, extremely loving, and yet their relationship was suffering, not because of him, but because of the previous perpetrators that had been in her life. She was, struggling with excessive obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD. She was spending about 5, 6, 7 hours a day just cleaning. She would have about 5 showers a day. She would clean her kitchen numerous times. I mean, she simply had no life. And so it didn't surprise me when you meet people like this and they are at a point where they tell you, really, what is there to live for? They just can't think of a reason to want to live life for another day. So abuse, and I'm particularly highlighting this because even though I'm just talking about sexual abuse, we know abuse comes in so many different shapes and forms. And the church is not an exclusive place where abuse happens. In fact, people, experts on this subject sometimes will tell you that the church can actually be the safe haven for perpetrators of abuse. Because in the church, we don't expect people to be abusers. We don't expect people to be horrible. We expect people to be loving, to be caring, to do all the things that the Bible says we should do. But in reality, sometimes that is far from the truth for many people. So abuse, psychosocial stresses, besides abuse, sometimes it may be problems about being able to meet the family needs, for example, whether financial, whether accommodation, whether looking after the children, the family, whether you feel you are actually being able to play your role either as the head of the home or as the mother of the household. All these issues sometimes can contribute to a person feeling life isn't worth carrying on. And let me just say, this is something that, again, I come across. Sometimes some of the men who believe their role is truly, to be the head of the home. Sometimes some of them, when they feel life isn't going the way they had always wanted it to go, they have a deep sense of shame, of embarrassment, of failing their families. And what is worse is that if they're not fortunate enough to be with a partner who understands, and that woman then sometimes might make comments about comparing him to peers and, look at your friends, look at how they are succeeding, and you are here wasting away such a useless man and the rest of it. All those things sometimes can contribute to how a person might feel life isn't worth living. And that can be a risk factor. And that can also go the other way around. Some of the men, we can be quite cruel, to partners in the language that sometimes we use, again, comparing our spouses to other women because we feel they are not matching up or measuring up to the standards that we feel they should have. Another risk factor is terminal illness. When people sometimes go through a severe terminal illness, sometimes people have been diagnosed with cancer, or some people go through extreme chronic pain that when they experience in those excruciating pain, they simply can't live with it. I mean, you're all aware of, for example, things that happen in Switzerland. People can go euthanasia. They can go and legally pay to take whatever it is they take to end their lives because sometimes the pain or the life that they have had to come to live simply isn't worth living as far as they're concerned. And then if somebody is also, maybe someone we are aware of that might have attempted suicide in the past, that individual may still be a risk or be at risk. Because if they've tried it once, who said they won't try it again? The reason for which they had attempted it once, usually which would mean suicide is a permanent solution to a transient problem, they might still hold those views and such thoughts. And for that reason, when they get to that temporary zone, the likelihood is that may still be considered an option that they might want to take. So when there have been previous attempts, it's something that we also need to bear in mind. And then, of course, we had mentioned family history of mental illness. Again, if somebody comes from a family where there is a line of individuals who may have struggled with mental illness, that may still be a risk factor for that individual. And then we may also know about people who may have access to firearms in their homes. Now, this may not be very common in the UK, because in the UK, I think it has to be a special license or something to have a firearm in your home. Perhaps unlike the USA, where even though I understand there are gun laws, people seem to be able to acquire, ammunition very, very easily. But if somebody has access to firearms in their home, sometimes that can be a risk factor. And then someone who has been released from prison. But I will add to that somebody who might have been an ex-army veteran who is now out of army and perhaps reintegrated into society. Those especially who may be struggling then from PTSD, for instance, really, really do struggle to reintegrate, because a lot of the time, because of the way they've been trained and how their mind works, everybody is being perceived as a threat to them. Reintegration into society for ex-army and veterans can be extremely difficult. It can create severe social anxiety, it can create severe depression, and some of these people get to a place where they feel that simply they can't go on. I had the privilege to work with some army veterans a few years back, and it's amazing how some of these people who were majors, who were issuing commands, who were driving people forward in the battlefield, come out of the army into society and they simply can't cope. And it's the same with people who may have come from prison. Prison is a place where people are very much socialized. There is a strict routine that they have to follow in terms of how they have to live. But when they come back and out of prison and into society, reintegrating where they have the freedom, they don't have the routine, somebody coming to tell them, get up, go for breakfast, get up, go for a shower, it's exercise time, do this and do that. Just that freedom now to restructure their own life for some people can be extremely difficult. But we also know there are issues around them maybe acquiring jobs, being able to sustain a home. So all these factors may create such a difficulty that some people either reoffend, so they get back inside, or for others, they may struggle with a mental health disorder because of that, and then they might contemplate ending it all. And then we talked about financial pressures and hardships that sometimes some people might face. Generally speaking, we may look at this and say, well, if you don't have money, why would you want to end your life because of that? But for some people, sometimes it's difficult. Even having that beans on toast may be something they simply can't find, let alone be able to find the money to pay the bills or provide for the children and the partner. And, so many factors may come into play. I mean, we are in the UK now, we're all facing, rising inflation, we're facing escalation in bills and everything else. And there are people who are genuinely, seriously afraid of what life has to offer. And for some people, financial pressures may be so much so that they feel that may be too much, and that can become a risk factor for them contemplating to end their own lives.
Can I say something?
Please.
I know of a young person who committed suicide. Now, I think about that person quite a lot. That person was made to feel that because they did something, they were in the church and they did something that they felt but was wrong. They knew it was wrong, but when they went to the church made them felt even worse. They got no help, but they felt as though they were being looked down upon, even by the parents. And this person attempted suicide and got some help. Then they tried it again. Well, I didn't know how to help the person. I tried to be as kind, but I didn't understand as much about God as I do now. I was new in the faith. But I realized that they were feeling that the people around them in the church was telling them that they weren't fit anymore for God. And what they did was so bad, and so they end their life finally. And I often feel that maybe if I knew a bit more, I might have been able to help. I don't know, but I think of that person, that young person, quite often. I don't feel depressed.
Yeah.
I don't know if I do, to be honest. I don't feel that that it was a burden. I just feel sorry that I didn't know a bit more that I could have helped. I just feel that if I was able to, maybe, who knows, if I knew more about the love of God and how God forgives us and loves us so much that he went to the cross. No one is perfect. I didn't know all of that then. I know now. But I'm thinking about this person that when we in the church, people could be so prejudiced. It really upsets me that when some person needs help, if we all stumble in our lives, we all make mistakes. But Christ is a forgiving, loving God. He went to the cross, and I don't think people should be made to feel that if they did something that it's unforgivable, especially when you go to people who should know better. And that upset me when I think about it. I live with it. I think about it when, like now, and it comes back to me, And so I think that the church has got to realize that if some person slip up, make a mistake, it's our responsibility to comfort, to show love and compassion, and to tell them, you make a mistake, you stumble, but Christ is not going to, you didn't mean to do it. We all, and we should try to help. And if we don't help, when that person finally commits suicide, how we wash our hands and think, well, it wasn't my fault. I didn't do anything. Yes, you did. You didn't help. And I'm sorry if I do think about it. And when I think about it, I get pretty upset. And like now, when I think about that poor young person that might have been alive today, if only we as Christian people in the church would show a little bit more understanding. If some person is divorced, don't make out that it's their fault. Before it's so painful sometimes when you think about it. And I've been there, I've seen it. I'm not making up a story. This is something that's happened in my life. Not to my family, but someone in the church that I knew when I first started. And I feel so sorry that that person has finally taken their lives. So very sorry about it. So I just want to let people realize that you know, these things happen, and
Yeah.
people should come and listen when you're talking about it, because we all need education. We shouldn't say, oh, well, it doesn't bother me. It does. If we don't come and listen when you're talking, when the pastor go out of his way to put on programs like this, we should all come to attend, because it can all affect us, all of us. You know, if it's not personal, it might be somebody that we know, and if we don't understand what's going on, how can we help? So, I'm sorry, I said my bit, and
Thank you.
I won't be so upset now.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. There are quite a lot of key points that have been highlighted in what you've just said, and I would say one or two things on that. But let me open that, you know, to the platform, to those on here, to comment, you know, to share their thoughts and views on what you've just heard. Auntie Kay, I believe, have just said. Anybody with any thoughts, any reflections in terms of the church's approach, you know, over the years, sometimes to people that we feel, interestingly, we feel have done things that are so wrong, and the way that sometimes people have been treated. As I said, I would say one or two on that, but let me open it to the floor. Anyone with any thoughts, any reflections on what Auntie Kay has just shared with us?
Oh, hello, it's Sister Cledia here.
Hi.
Yeah, yes, what Auntie Kay is saying is true. The church has failed a lot around mental illness. It has failed. Besides mental illness, as Auntie Kay said, when there is a mistake, they sort of focus on that mistake instead of embracing that individual and show love to that individual, to say, you have done a mistake. You are still our own. We will love you no matter what you have done. But the church has, worldwide, the church has failed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that comment. Auntie Kay, well, I'm not sure how young this young person was, but look at it from two angles. So the first one, I just want to highlight, you know, the church's approach. And I'm talking the church's approach versus Jesus's approach. Every one of us, the Bible says, is a sinner. But traditionally, what seems to happen is that it's almost as if people who only have trouble in relationships or out of relationships, so either committing fornication or adultery or having a baby outside wedlock or being married and being divorced, and we seem to have something over the years. We seem to have something about these people as if they are the only biggest sinners in the church. And I was saying that, you know, over the last few decades that I've been on this planet and in this church, I don't ever recall a single occasion where somebody was either censured or disfellowshipped for telling lies and destroying a family or somebody's life. I don't ever recall that. And yet when you read Revelation, and it talks about all the sinners that would be outside of the city, liars were one of those people. So it seems to me, in God's eyes, there aren't bigger sinners and smaller sinners. And if Christ himself would forgive every sin, Christ who never sinned, who am I? And who are you to decide who should be censured, should be disfellowshipped, who should be thrown out of church, who should be made to feel ashamed because of something they did, to a point that they feel the church that is supposed to be a hospital is seized to treat the sick people. So
Yeah,
that's
and
one thing.
sorry, I found that it was people that was in the church for years and years and years that should know better. They were the ones that made this poor person felt so bad. And that's what was the bad thing about it. You would have thought that after all these years of knowing the Bible backward, never put the Bible down, they're the ones that should have been helping. They should have understood what are they reading, what are they understanding from it. And I couldn't understand it. And then this poor young person just in such a terrible way. I just thought, oh Lord have mercy, what are we are supposed to care? All the people that's been in the church for years and years, they seem to twist the what the words say to suit their own heart, their own way of thinking, instead of what God is saying about love and compassion. And I just couldn't, if Jesus did not call me into the church, I could have walked away. But because Jesus himself called me when he knew that I was looking and looking, and he reached out to me and called me and said, this is where I want you to be in this church instead of that church where you were going to. And here I am today, and I'm happy to be where I am, and nothing, I pray with God's grace that nothing will change my mind. But I think that when I see what happened to this young person, when you should reach out, and I thought, Lord, if I was in that person's shoes, that could have happened to me.
Yeah.
Where would I have got the love and the fellowship? Where would I have got the help from if I had made a mistake and gone to these people? Would they do this? Would they turn their backs on me and cold shoulder me and not smiling at me and not looking and preach to me about how evil things are and how God wouldn't forgive this and the preaching? It's so. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I'm going on.
No, I can hear your pain even as you talk about this young person's story. And I guess that the second point I was going to make as well is that let's look out for our young people. Let's spend time, intentionally spend time to create a situation, an atmosphere for our young people so they will be able to share and disclose and get the support and the guidance that they can get from those of us as adults whilst they are on their own journey, with Christ or with whatever life may hold for them. Because many a time, our young people are going through so much that we as adults may not necessarily always be privy to knowing what they're going through. One of the churches I went to do a presentation with, not very, about a couple of years or so ago, and I remember one parent saying, something I think I mentioned the other day, like, we're here. In fact, what this lady said, and I'm quoting her, our children don't have any issues, because we pray for them and we make sure they have what they need, and we make sure they come to church every Sabbath. And because of all these things that we have put in place, our children do not have any problem and they wouldn't be facing any of these issues. At the end of divine worship, and I was just chatting to people, and one young man came to see me and asked if we could talk in private. And then he discloses that actually his mother was one woman that was making the comments, but he disclosed that actually he had made 2 attempts on his life. The mother had no idea. A story I read on the VOP website, I think one of the Malyshenko brothers, one of the pastors, wrote a story, a real life situation that he had from a young person who had written to the church and was really angry, about the church and the way she'd been treated and everything else. And so this pastor then started to engage with her, just trying to establish some sort of conversation, friendship, or whatever to keep a form of relationship going. And as they continued talking, and the lady kind of began to gain some confidence, thinking that, okay, this person probably seems like someone I could talk to. That was when she disclosed everything she'd been through. She had been sexually abused by one of the leaders in the church. When the issue came up, of course, the church just couldn't bring themselves to think that one of their own would be the perpetrator to do something like that. And so the treatment of this young lady, as it happens with a lot of young people when they go through abuse, is that she wasn't believed. In fact, she was accused of lying. And the way she was treated because of that was so horrible that she said she left the church, and the last thing on earth she wanted to hear about was anything to do with God, anything to do with church. Not only did she leave the church, but then she started immersing herself in spiritualism and some horrible satanic influences and forces and things that she was joining. But somehow, when out of anger, she decided to then turn and tell the church how she truly felt, God worked through this minister, and eventually, when you have time, you can check out the story online, VOP, story shared by Malishenko. I think the lady's name is Cindy, and you can read more about it, and eventually being rebaptized into the church. But it was all because somebody took the time to put himself out there, to be persistent, to try and show practical love and care that won her confidence to be back. There are many of our young people, when they leave that age, when they feel they can leave, and they leave, they do not want to look back because the pain and the hurt is so deep. I've heard stories, parents abusing their children, resulting in pregnancy, and then causing the daughters to cause abortion because it will tarnish the family name. And yet the young person then has to stay and keep the secret just to keep the family name in the church. And then they have to sit and listen to this same person preaching who is re-traumatizing them daily. These are harsh stuff for our young people and even for adults. So there are so many things happening around us. And I believe, like Pastor said in the devotion, we have been all called to be leaders, to be our own way, to bring hope, comfort, care, strength, not to judge and not to destroy, but to build and restore. And the way we go about these issues, when we feel our brethren have done the wrong things, yes, we have a duty to correct, but let's do so from a place of humility, of support towards one another, rather than of a place of a holier than thou, looking down on those who might have erred. Let me move on very quickly after those points. But Sister Kay, I'm really grateful for raising that. And beloved, the work we have is great. It's big, and it's not just about what we do on Sabbath. There is so much that we have to do in the course of the week because there is so much pain and suffering that are happening all around us. Let me quickly talk about signs of suicide. So if somebody is in that place where they are contemplating, what are some of the things that we might hear or see that we need to pay attention to? So when people start talking about dying, and you may hear words such as, I wish I had not been born, or that I'll be better off dead, or that, I wish I wasn't here, that life for others would be better. and you start hearing these sort of lines in people's conversations, we need to pay attention, because it might just be they are in that place where they are beginning to feel they just can't go on anymore. And then you may be speaking with people, and out of the blue, these may be individuals all of a sudden seeking access to guns, to pills, to knives, or other objects that they could use, to commit suicide, like rope, for example. So when people out of conversation, out of character, you notice these are some of the things that are happening in conversations. We need to pay attention. We need to try and ask more, make ourselves available to listen, and genuinely listen without judgment. And before you hear, try not to come up with about 20 million answers before you even hear what they have to say to you. Because once that starts, for some people, they shut down, they won't say another word. And then for others, this is where they might go through a bit of preparations. Sometimes you may hear about people giving out very prized possessions, or giving out things that they have valued. Or some people may begin to write notes for people that they love, they care about. If again, you happen to come across anything like this in conversations, or anything like this in somebody's behaviors, this may be alarm bells that may be ringing. And again, it's something you can take the time to try and find out a bit more from the person. Again, remember, we've got 2 ears, and the purpose is so we can listen actively to each other without judgment. And then you may find some people who may begin to engage in self-destructive behaviors. Again, usually we will say, oh, well, this may not be something that applies to those of us in the church. We're not supposed to drink, so we don't really have to worry about it. So we don't supposed to take drugs, and so we don't have to worry about these things. Well, the truth is, when people get into that place and they're really struggling, and they're really looking for anything to take away the pain, they might not just take alcohol, they may actually abuse alcohol as a way of slowly ending their own lives. The same for drug use or drug misuse. And then for some people, they may actually engage in behaviors like reckless driving. They wouldn't care whether they would drive and going to drive the car into a river. They wouldn't care whether they would drive the car into a tree or into some brick wall. They may engage in behaviors that they know that the level of recklessness attached to it means that they could end up ending their lives in the process. For some people, sometimes it's the shifting in moods. They may have been agitated, they may have been really low, and all of a sudden, there is a state of calm that seems to surround them. Sometimes it might just be because they have managed to come to terms with the fact that this is it, and they are calm with that decision making to a point that they would go on to take their own life. So again, when you see that massive shift in a person's life from where they have been, the struggles, and all of a sudden to this complete state of calm, that sometimes may be the alarm bells that might be ringing again, that we need to take note of. So what are some of the initial steps we need to take, or that we can take, to help somebody again to stay away or revert any decision they might be contemplating when it comes to suicide? First thing, we have to take what they say seriously. Somebody might come to you and say, for example, the way life is going, I really don't feel I want to be here anymore. In fact, I actually feel that my life would be so much better for my wife, for my children, with everything they're going through, if I wasn't here. Well, we need to take what they're saying seriously. Who is on this? You are. But if ever get to that place, and for example, you think life is so horrible, and so you would rather end your life because that would make life better for others, believe me, it never make lives better for others. There was this lady I used to work with years ago. They'd had Christmas, the whole family had been around. They've had the usual turkey and all the everything that goes with it, the potatoes, and they've had an amazing Christmas, lovely sharing and gifting and all that kind of stuff with the spouse, with the children, when they've all been together. Christmas had gone, New Year had passed, the lady had returned to work, the man at this time wasn't working, and this lady was at work one day and the police come around asking to speak to her. So out of shock, she's wondering what is going on. She goes out to speak with the police, and the news that they come with is that your husband is jumped from a multi-story car park and had died. This lady was in pieces. Like, for a very long time to come, her life was really turned upside down. Because one of the things that suicide does is that whilst the individual might have gone through with it, is those unanswered questions that it leaves with those left behind. Is the guilt that those left behind would live with because of the feeling that there's something they could have done and they didn't do. Even though many a time there is absolutely nothing they could have done to have changed the situation. So either way, whether it's for the person who's gone or for those who are left behind, suicide is definitely never the answer, even though we know life situations might drive some people to that point. So take what they say to you seriously. Encourage this individual to openly talk about how they feel. Women, the reason why normally in mental health, and that is shifting actually, is that over the years, they have seemed to be that you tend to see more women in therapy than you see men. Because naturally, it appears, women will talk. If they have a problem, they will open up, they will share, they will talk. Very easily, they will go to a GP, they will open up and talk about next to everything that's going on for them. On the other hand, when it comes to us men, within many cultures, we seem to have been socialized to believe that talking about how you feel is somehow a form of weakness. That you can't talk about feelings. You can't talk about, feeling low. You can't talk about feeling sad. You can't talk about feeling suicidal because people will think, come on, you're a man, just pull yourself together. And so even though men, by the figures, usually may tend to be less struggling with mental health issues, yet when it comes to suicide, the rate of suicide in men are higher than in women. Why? Because most of the time, the men won't talk and things will get so bad that the next thing they feel they have to end it all. And let me just say, talking about feelings, it doesn't make you weak. A lot of people be in a relationship and sometimes, tempers fly and it's very obvious this man is so angry. And you ask them, why are you angry? And they say, oh, I'm not angry. Come on. Everything about you says that you are angry. What is it that makes us think you can't just say, you know what? Yes, I am angry, but perhaps give me a moment to work through what is going on with me, and then maybe we can talk. It's okay to share our emotions. One of our, Bible texts that I love so much right from being childhood is in John 11:35. And I'm sure some of you can remember only 2 words. Jesus wept. This was at Lazarus's death and before he raised him back to life. Jesus wept. And this was recorded for us. And so the question sometimes I'm asking, men who think that talking about feelings makes you weak, is that, do we look at Jesus and think he was weak? Or that he is weak? Do we look at him as somebody who was an emotional wreck just because he wept? But what is interesting is that Jesus didn't go and hide in a closet somewhere and weep. He did that in public. And I think that says a lot to us, that it's okay to share how you feel. Many a time, the way, the out of character type of reaction that we would make to things is because we have not learned to speak and to share how we feel. We suppress how we feel, and then this may come out sometimes in ways that may be very unhealthy. So encourage someone who may be struggling and talking about suicide to share how they feel in a non-threatening way, non-judgmental way. Encourage the person to seek professional help, because sometimes besides the listening that you might be able to offer, it might be that they need more than just having that conversation. And then if somebody is truly going through that phase and is struggling, let's make sure we always are around those people, or that there is somebody there that may be keeping an eye on them or taking care of them. Leaving them to them means that they can be immersing themselves deeper in those thoughts, and it may just be a matter of time before they actually act on it. And then talk about, talk openly, just like we do it. Let's talk about it. I'm not saying that every time you sit at your dinner table, let's talk about suicide. No, that's not what we're talking about. But when we have chance to discuss these issues, let's talk about it. In as much as a person taking their own lives isn't what we will call normal, yet the reality of human normality is that these events do happen. And the more we talk about it, the easier it would be for others to openly seek help when they need it. And then, as you can see, this is in bold, actively listen. And I cannot say that enough. As a people of God, we're not always very good at listening. Sometimes as parents, we're not very good at listening to our children. Sometimes as spouses, we're not very good at listening to each other. Sometimes as friends, we are very poor in listening to each other. Listening actively to understand where a person is coming from is so crucial to be able to help in finding that solution that the person might need. And that should be the end of the presentation. I think, in all fairness, it will probably do much justice to the whole anxiety presentations if we do that as a series on its own, because anxiety has so many dimensions to it, various types that many of us also struggle with. So as far as this is concerned, we'll end it here. We'll take some questions, some comments for the next few minutes. And then, Pastor, maybe we can look at setting up another series just purely on anxiety disorders that hopefully, I believe, would also be quite beneficial to most of us. So at this point in time, the floor is open for questions, for comments, for anything that anyone may have that they want to share.
Hi, it's Trevor here.
Hi, Trevor.
Hi. From what you were saying, well, a few days ago, a guy, he is a Christian, was talking to me and like opened up, I think, probably more to me than he does to most people. But one of the things he said was, I said, you need to go to your GP. He said he went to the GP and the GP's given him some drugs and it's not really helped very much. So he went back to his GP and said, these aren't really helping very much. Can you refer me to someone else to deal with this or some sort of therapy or whatever? And the GP said no. And just, that was it, sent him home. Just stay on the drugs, he's on the maximum drugs that he can take. The GP wouldn't refer him to anywhere, and he said he feels that he needs psychiatric help. He's really struggling. And I'm not qualified to, give him proper help. All I can do is be there for him, but it does worry me big time that these are the warning signs that you've been speaking about. He's very depressed. he usually very, or often very quiet when he wasn't. He didn't used to be,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it
yeah.
does. I'm very concerned, but I don't know what to do. What do you do? He's been to his GP. The GP's refused to refer him to a psychiatric unit or anything that he requires, and it does worry me that something dreadful may happen. So I don't, really
Right.
don't know
Okay.
what to do about that.
Okay. Thank you for raising that question. Well and truly, when I hear some of these stories about some of the local GPs, it kind of takes me back to perhaps about 20 odd years ago when GPs were very, well, not all of them, some GPs perhaps were naive about mental health stuff, or that GPs hardly ever did anything or talked very much about mental health stuff. But in 2021 or 2022, even, for anyone to experience something like that from a local GP is just not on. Now, if this person is in Sussex, I know that Sussex has at least a primary healthcare service because
Usually Sussex, yeah.
he's in Sussex. Okay,
Yeah.
because I do work in Sussex, and I know that there is a service there. And so it's kind of quite surprising that the GP would just give medication, not properly review and look at other options, and to send the person away. This person has every right to request to speak to another GP, even if it's within the same surgery or a different surgery. He doesn't have to stick with this particular GP if he thinks what he's getting isn't the best. He can request to speak to another GP and voice his concerns. The other thing that I know, that if he is really struggling and he thinks suicide may be a real issue, if there is that risk, he can also contact the community mental health team, which, if there is a high risk, usually would at least offer to do assessment and then take it from there. If they assess and they think that the risk level isn't that, really serious, they would still refer the person at least to primary care, where he can still get some psychological help alongside the medication. So the first thing is continue to be a friend to this person. Yes, I know that you can't offer him much beyond being a friend and listening, but you can continue to encourage him to speak to somebody else. He doesn't have to just stick with his own GP. And as I said, if risk is a real factor at this point in time in terms of risk of suicide, then speak to community mental health team. They would assess the risk, at least offer some assessment initially. If it's not that severe for them to offer support, normally they will refer back to primary care, and he can still get some psychological support from there. So the matter shouldn't end with his own GP just saying, go away, and I'm not going to give you anything else. If the person is genuinely struggling, that should not be the case.
Brother Emmanuel, I think, everything you said is quite true, but referrals nowadays are taken by the GPs, and it's quite challenging to go directly to the community mental health teams. Unless otherwise it becomes critical or severe, that you end up in A&E, then you can come through that direction. They might refer you from A&E. But if you go through the mental health team directly, they might refer you back to your GP to get a formal referral before they can see you. And that's the challenge sometimes for people getting access to the service. What I would suggest to Brother Trevor is that if you are really concerned about this person, call the GP and tell them, I am with this person, I'm really concerned, and I think he needs to see someone. GPs sometimes take that seriously and act on them more than the individuals going there themselves. I've had these experiences in the past, and so you can try it that way. And sometimes tell them the severity of what this person is telling you and tell them your concern. If they still don't want to do anything, you tell them you're going to complain about their position, and immediately they will do something about that. Yeah.
Thank you.
It is a challenge because the GPs are the referral route. They are between the primary and the secondary services.
Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor. Anyone else with any other questions or comments? Okay, it sounds like, or looks like there isn't any further questions. So Pastor, over to you.
Thank you, Brother Emmanuel. Before we finish, I was just looking at the rota here. Because we have not been able to touch on anxiety, would it be possible? We do have another program put down between after next week when you have your last session. But in April, would you be able to give us another 4 weeks and maybe explore more on anxiety and probably go into a bit into bipolar as well?
Okay. April.
Same time on Friday. But
On
we don't have to make the decision here.
Okay.
Let's talk behind the scene.
Let's talk later. Yeah. It's possible. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, yeah, let's talk.
All right.